South Sudan's Vice President Riek Machar has warned against holding elections before a unified army is formed. Last month, however, President Salva Kiir announced that the elections would take place at the end of the transitional period in 2023. President Kiir and Mr. Machar formed a unity government in February last year to end conflict between their rival forces and agreed to form a unified army of 83,000 troops. Mr. Machar listed three other conditions that he wanted fulfilled before elections could be held, which are the return of millions of refugees from neighbouring countries, a nationwide census and a permanent constitution. For some analysis, we're now joined by Dr. Madut, who's a Professor of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University in New York State in America. Thanks very much indeed for joining. It's always good to talk to you.
Wonderful to be with you, sir. It's a daunting situation there in South Sudan.
So elections are scheduled for 2023. Are the obstacles so big and so insurmountable that they can't be dealt with by then?
Not at all. They are not totally unsurmountable. What they require is simply a political will and a commitment from the leadership of that country. But we know that whether to hold elections or not to hold elections has now become a pawn on this game of chess. Platform where the president wants to blame others for not holding elections, when in fact he himself knows that he didn't do the many steps that were required for the elections to be possible, one of which is security arrangements, forming a unified national defense force. And President Kiir has dragged his feet for too long on that fundamental condition. Another is that you would have to do a census. You would have to demarcate constituencies. You would have to have a constitution. And above all, you have to have the readiness financially and otherwise to hold elections come the end of 2022, early 2023. And on each of all those, President Kiir has come off totally unwilling and incapable of holding elections. But now he was saying...
Why do you think he has been lethargic or negligent in fulfilling those steps?
Well, I think he was cornered into signing an agreement with his arch enemy, the first vice president, Dr. Riek Machar, in 2018. And that agreement, which is called the Agreement on the Resolution of Conflict in South Sudan, ARCIS, was sponsored by Khartoum, by al-Bashir. And one of the cornerstones of that agreement would be for the two parties and many other smaller parties to get together and form a coalition government. And this coalition government called Revitalize Government on the transitional government of national unity for South Sudan. That government was tasked with doing all these things, doing the security arrangements, unifying all the militias and forces into national defense force, putting up money to do all the necessary steps, and then hold elections at the end of the interim period, which was 3 years at that time. Now they are finding themselves, President Kiir particularly finding himself cornered into ensuring that this process is done at the risk of him being required to make a decision to run for another term or to not run for another term. If he ran for another term and Riek Machar runs for a term, the likelihood is that their contest of power could be another trigger for a civil war. So the South Sudanese are stuck with this situation to go for elections at the risk of whatever outcome the elections will bring is more likely to cause war between these two parties. And therefore, The country is now at a crossroads. Are we going to hold elections at the risk of violence? Are we not going to hold elections at the risk of the country not being able to move forward with all these things, including the suffering of the people under terrible circumstances?
If these sides just don't trust each other and have been even at war recently, is it possible to unify them under one army?
Well, that is the challenge, right? Because you have armies, multiple armies that have been fighting each other and have fought really vicious, violent confrontations to the point where the only way they see each other is that the other is an enemy, and very little in between. So whether they will ratchet down that level of animosity and prioritize the interests of the nation above political and military needs is the challenge that the South Sudanese are watching them to be able to do. But we know that these animosities have run so deep between the two political leaders that it seems like the only leeway for each one of them is to outdo the other. And therefore, whether you will hold elections in 2023 or not is going to be the deciding factor on whether South Sudan will now become a stable country or become a violent, unstable country. And the onus is on these leaders, whether they want the interests of the country at heart or whether they have their own political needs above everything else. And there is the challenge. That is the nationalistic duty that every South Sudanese is looking at them to decide. Do you want this country to go to hell just so that you get your way? Or do you want to get out of the way such that this country can move forward in a new dispensation? That is the challenge we are facing today in South Sudan.
But this sounds like something that the African Union can step in to manage. When you have two sides at an impasse, they need a third party to manage because clearly they're not going to be able to deal with it themselves.
Well, that is possible, but we know that the African Union is made up of African leaders who are themselves dealing with similar situations within their own borders. Who is going to stick their neck out and say South Sudanese leaders must behave when each one of them, those leaders, are confronting similar situations where they would themselves be expected to do things in that vein in their own country? So that means the AU is really not the venue. So then maybe it's a regional organization. There is the East African Community, there is the international, the Intergovernmental Agency on Development called IGAD, which is a trade group for Horn of Africa. Whether they themselves have the stamina, the commitment, and the clout to bring to bear on the leaders in South Sudan is something that we have not seen so up to this minute. There's a UN-sponsored and IGAD-sponsored process called JMAC, Joint Monitoring and a group, which is supposed to make sure that the peace agreement is implemented to the letter and the spirit. All of them have failed. It's been 3 years plus since the peace agreement was signed. It's been 16 years since South Sudan became an independent, autonomous country, autonomous region. It's since 2011, South Sudan has become an independent country. And the political leaders of South Sudan have prioritized their own interest above the interest of the greater good of the people and the country. So whether outsiders have a leeway, have an influence, have a cloud to bring to bear on these leaders is something that has not borne fruit so far. So I want to say that it is the leaders of South Sudan themselves, people who have done so much to make possible the birth of this country through their revolutionary efforts, that in the end needs to dig deep into their own hearts and their own minds to make a decision about what matters. Is it their leadership roles and their positions, or is it the welfare of South Sudan? That decision is with them.
The merging of the army, one can understand, is a pretty thorny issue, but having a census seems pretty straightforward. Drawing up a new constitution, again, seems like a pretty straightforward thing to do. Why would there be reluctance to get this process done? Let's talk about the census. Does Mr. Machar think that this census will work in his favor?
No, I think everybody knows that a census is a good thing and it is a harmless thing. And nobody would lose by having the people of South Sudan counted properly. And on the basis of the proper counting, you would create constituencies. And these constituencies will then elect people to represent them in the people's house, in the people's parliament. That seems like a straightforward thing. The only issue is the correct implementation of the peace agreement. Some people think that it doesn't work for them very well, and that they would rather have the country remain in chaos so that they can thrive, because a country where there is order does not lend itself for them thriving. So it is not really the challenges of doing it. President Kiir might say, well, we don't have enough money. South Sudan is also under UN arms embargo. And we have no capacity to graduate a unified force when we cannot arm them. And we say, South Sudanese, ordinary people, civil society, political parties will say, we don't need arms to graduate a unified force. Mm-hmm. We don't need a lot of money to do a census. We don't need a lot of money to do a constitution. All we need is political will to do a census, count our people, demarcate constituencies, unify the army, and deploy that army on infrastructure projects such as road construction. They don't have to have guns for this. South Sudan is not fighting a war with any neighboring country. So there is no need for guns. All you need is to organize an army, reduce its size to a meaningful size, make it professional, make it representative of the diversity of the country, and move forward with rebuilding the state or rebuilding the nation and so forth. It doesn't take a lot of money, and yet it is the money, the absence of money, the squandering of resources of the country, which President Kiir will put forth and say, we don't have enough money to do all these things. Why do you need so much money? And if you express a goodwill, African countries, European countries, North American countries would simply be willing to help you financially so that you dispense of the responsibilities on the elections and census and so forth. It's only absence of goodwill and political will that is holding South Sudan back. It's not the lack of resources.
Dr. Madut, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much. Always great getting your valuable insights on the situation in Sudan. Thank you so much for your time.